When a homeless kid shouted, "Don't eat that," no one expected what would happen next. The Park Bistro was a draw for the city's upper crust, nestled between lines of groomed shrubs and the murmur of a close by. Spring, it was noon, and the bistro hummed with activity. Servers in neat outfits glided smoothly among tables, juggling platters of gourmet meals and newly made tea. The air carried the scent of hot rolls and the subtle fragrance of opening blossoms. But for one gentleman, none of this appeared noteworthy at a choice. Spot in the middle sat Harold Blue, a title linked with authority and riches he had created his kingdom from. Nothing beginning, with property in his 20s, and growing into projects that few could imagine at 72, he held himself with the assurance of someone who possessed not just his realm, but perhaps the realms of everyone nearby. His crisp suit and silver-edged spectacles mirrored a life of luxury, yet as he scanned the list, his actions were gradual, almost uncertain. Across from him rested Elena, his far younger spouse, a lady who seemed taken straight out of a periodical front, her raven dark locks outlined a visage that was impossibly refined, her vivid crimson lip color meticulously put on. Every bit of her yelled sophistication, but her grin didn't fully touch her eyes. She spun a gemstone band on her arm idly, her focus locked, not on her partner, but on her phone display. Close by, a lad hung about just past the terrace barrier. He was tiny for his years, his large sweatshirt draping freely on his slim build. His deep eyes flicked from spot to spot, examining dishes and pouches, seeking a chance. His name was Jamal, though no one in the bistro knew him. His countenance was known on this road, a child with nowhere to stay always, on the fringes of talks and the borders of worry. Harold checked his timepiece. "You're unfocused again," he said, his tone even but direct. Elena glanced up and beamed, though there was no heat in it. "I'm right here," she answered pleasantly, stretching over the table to lay her palm on his. "You know how much I love these meals." Jamal's belly rumbled. He shifted nearer, his steps nearly soundless as he pressed against the terrace rail. His eyes settled on Harold's spot. It was the sort of feast he hadn't viewed nearby in months, a spotless white dish of broth flanked by fresh loaf and a tumbler of fizzy water. But then something odd occurred as Harold adjusted his lenses and grabbed his phone. Elena's palm slid into her luxury purse. Jamal saw her digits close around a tiny bottle. She turned it open with a relaxed twist, angling her palm ever so gently over the hot dish. The fluid mixed with the broth in a flash, vanishing like it had never existed. Jamal's breath hitched. He stiffened, observing her mix the broth with the ladle, her look unchanged. Then she bent nearer to Harold, her tone soft but just loud. "Enough after all the effort I've endured. You won't spoil this now." The lad blinked, unsure of what he had just seen. Was this actual? Could a lady who appeared so flawless, sitting in a spot so shiny, really be doing what he figured? But Jamal couldn't dismiss the sense that something was deeply amiss. Jamal's pulse thumped in his torso as he squatted lower behind the rail. He wasn't certain what he'd just observed, but the way the lady's tone carried those icy words, it sent a chill through him. He tightened his grips, his nails pressing into his palms. No one else had spotted, no one else had been focusing. It was just him. The faint rumble in his belly drew him back to actuality, but his eyes stayed glued on the pair. Harold appeared weary, distracted, his ladle hanging over the dish as he viewed his phone. Elena was all allure and grace again, her beam radiant, her palm resting on her jaw as if she hadn't just murmured something freezing moments ago. Jamal could sense the burden of the choice crushing down on him. His gut yelled to stroll away. Why get mixed? Who would trust a child like him, a lad in a worn sweatshirt standing at the margins of a realm he wasn't invited in? He gulped hard, looking around at the other guests' laughter, chatter, the tinkling of glasses. No one minded, no one even spotted him, but his gaze went back to Harold's ladle now. Plunging into the broth, Jamal felt his torso constrict. It wasn't just his fancy. He had seen her spill something into it. He knew what would occur if the elderly gentleman took a sip. His mind sped. He didn't know this gentleman, but that didn't count. Wrong was wrong. The instant dragged endlessly, and then without pondering, Jamal shoved himself off the rail and strode straight to the spot. His limbs felt like weight, but his feet didn't halt. His tone cracked as he yelled, "Don't eat that, heads. Spun talk halted mid-phrase. The clatter of a fallen utensil rang across the bistro. Harold stiffened his ladle inches from his mouth, his broad eyes locking onto the lad. Elena whipped her head around, her look hardening. "What did you just utter?" she demanded, her tone keen, enough to slice through Crystal. Jamal didn't waver. His tone was unsteady, but loud enough for everyone to catch. "She put something in your meal. I saw her. Don't eat it." Gasps spread through the bistro as every guest turned toward the scene. The hush that followed was stifling. Jamal stood his turf, his torso heaving as excitement rushed through him. Harold blinked, glancing between the lad and his spouse. What is he discussing? Elena, his tone was even, but his palm shook as he placed the ladle down on the table. Elena's calm broke, like an elastic band pulled too far. She jumped to her feet, her seat scraping noisily against the stone. "Ground, you little fibber," she hissed, her tone dripping with poison. "How dare you charge me of something so awful? Who even allowed you in here?" The words hurt, but Jamal didn't retreat. His eyes stayed locked on Harold's, desperate to make him view. "The fact I saw her," she spilled something into your broth when you weren't looking," he said, his tone steadying as he spoke. "You can sniff it if you don't trust me." Harold's face whitened as he turned toward his spouse, his eyes squinting. "Elena, what's happening?" he asked, his tone quiet but solid. She scoffed, waving a brushing palm. "He's just trying to stir trouble. Look at him, he probably just wants cash or meals." She spat the words out like they were toxin themselves, her gaze flicking to Jamal with open scorn. But the lad didn't sway. He stepped nearer to the table, his grips tightened. "I'm not fibbing," he said, solidly, his tone climbing. "She doesn't want you to know, but I saw everything." Harold's palm hovered over the dish, torn between doubt and the gnawing uncertainty sneaking into his thoughts, but something in the lad's tone made him pause. The air around the table seemed to thicken. The once vibrant bistro, now strangely quiet. All eyes were locked on the developing play. Their meals forgotten. Harold leaned back slightly in his seat, examining the lad with a probing gaze. His face bore the signs of a gentleman used to folks playing tricks with him, trying to exploit his riches. But this was different. The lad didn't shrink, didn't look away. "Jamal, is it?" Harold asked, his tone steady, though a hint of doubt lingered. The lad nodded. "Yes, I'm telling the fact. Please don't eat it," he said, his tone soft but pressing. Elena let out a rough laugh, folding her arms as she stared Jamal down. "This is ludicrous," she snapped, her tone frosty. "He's just some road child looking for notice. Are you really going to amuse this rubbish?" But Harold didn't reply to her. Instead, he picked up the ladle again, this time holding it closer to his face. His palm shook slightly, not from dread, but from the quiet tempest building within him. "Elena," he said slowly, his eyes meeting hers. "You heard him. What exactly is going on here?" Elena's mask of grace cracked further, her lips pressing into a slim line. "I can't believe you're even inquiring me that it's offensive." She turned to the growing crowd, her tone climbing. "He's lying. Look at him. He probably doesn't even know who you are. Why would you trust him over me?" The burden of her words hung in the air, but they didn't have the impact she'd hoped for. The crowd was whispering now, their eyes darting between the three of them. Murmurs floated through the air. "Did she really do it? Look at her. She seems anxious. That lad doesn't look like he's making this up." The murmurs only fueled Elena's anger. She slammed her palms on the table, her refined manner gone. "Enough of this, Harold. Eat your damn broth and let's go," she hissed, her tone trembling with fury. But Jamal wasn't retreating. He took another step forward, his grips tightened tightly. "If you won't trust me, then call someone to check it," he said, his tone climbing with haste. "You're wealthy. You've got attorneys, physicians, folks who can figure it out, but don't eat it. If you do, you'll regret it." Harold's jaw clenched as he turned back to the dish. The ladle was still in his palm, but he didn't raise it to his lips, his eyes weary and scheming. Shifted to his spouse. "Elena," he said, his tone low, "you've been acting odd for weeks now." This, her face flushed and she stumbled over her words. I don't know what you're talking about. You can't seriously think I'd poison me," Harold finished for her, his tone blade sharp. The crowd gasped audibly, their whispers growing Louder, Jamal stood firm, his gaze. Unwavering, he could feel his pulse pounding, but he wouldn't let it show he'd done what he could. Now it was up to Harold to make. The next move, Elena straightened up her look, hardening into something cold and music unfamiliar. This is ridiculous. I don't have to sit here and listen to this nonsense, she said, grabbing her purse, but before she could leave Harold's, palm shot out, gripping her arm with surprising force for a gentleman his age. You're not going anywhere, he said solidly. Not until we get to the bottom of this. The server, who had been frozen in place, finally spoke up. Sir, should I call the authorities? The question sent a wave through the bistro, and for the first time Elena looked genuinely alarmed. She shook her head violently. Don't you dare! This is just a mix-up. Harold, you can't seriously. But Harold raised his palm, silencing her. Yes, he said, addressing the server, without looking away from Elena. Call them. Jamal felt a rush of ease, but it was short-lived. The fact wasn't out yet, and the strain was far from over. The bistro held its group breath as the server hurried inside to make the call Harold let go of. Elena's arm, his eyes never leaving. Hers, the once refined charm she wore so effortlessly, was now coming apart, replaced by a growing sense of despair. She glanced around, her lips moving but no sound coming out, as though searching for an escape. Meanwhile, Jamal stood a few steps back, his palms shaking slightly. He'd done all he could, but now he felt the burden of doubt creeping in. What if the gentleman didn't trust him after all? What if she managed to talk her way out of this? He tightened his grips, forcing himself to stay rooted in place. Jamal, Harold said suddenly, his tone cutting through the strain. You said you saw her put something in the broth. Can you describe it? The lad nodded quickly, stepping forward. It was a tiny container, like one you'd use for remedy. Clear fluid. She spilled it in when you were looking at your phone, then mixed it. I swear I saw it. Harold's face tightened. He turned to Elena, who was already shaking her head. This is absurd. He's lying. Why would I? But Harold cut her off. Why would he lie? What could he possibly gain from this? The crowd murmured again, and the sound of alarms in the distance added to the charged atmosphere. Elena's eyes darted toward the dish, and for a split second her carefully crafted facade slipped completely. She looked trapped then, as if grasping at straws. She rounded on Jamal. You've been spying on us, haven't you, trying to cause trouble because you're jealous of people who actually have something? The words hit Jamal like a slap, but he stood his turf. I'm not jealous, he said solidly. I saw what I saw, and I couldn't just stand there and let you hurt him. The alarms grew louder, and soon 2 police officers entered the bistro. The room seemed to shrink as they approached the table, their palms resting on their belts. What's going on here? One of them asked, his tone neutral but commanding. Harold stood, his towering build still demanding respect despite his age. Officers, I need you to take a look at this, he said, gesturing toward the dish of broth. This lad claims my spouse poisoned it. The officers exchanged glances, their looks carefully blank. One of them leaned down, sniffing the dish cautiously, then turned to Elena. Ma'am, do you have anything to say about this? Her face turned scarlet. This is ridiculous. He's just a road child trying to make trouble. Harold, you're really going to let this nonsense go this far? But the officer wasn't buying her deflection. We need to test the contents, he said, reaching for the dish. No, Elena snapped, her tone climbing. The outburst drew even more attention, and her sudden panic only made her look guiltier. The officer paused, narrowing his eyes. Ma'am, is there something you'd like to tell us before we proceed? Elena hesitated, her torso rising and falling rapidly. She looked at Harold, then at the officers, her palms trembling as she clutched her purse. Finally, her resolve crumbled. Fine, she spat, her tone low but dripping with venom. You want the fact I'm tired of living in his shadow, tired of his control over everything. He was never supposed to make it past this year, and she stopped abruptly, realizing too late that she'd said too much. The bistro erupted in gasps, some guests pulling out their phones to record the scene. Harold's face went pale as the burden of her confession hit him like a truck. The officer stepped forward, his look grim. Ma'am, I'm placing you under arrest for attempted murder. Please put your palms where I can see them. Elena's calm shattered completely. She screamed, trying to wriggle free as they secured her palms behind her back. You don't understand. I deserved everything he had. Everything, she shouted as they led her away, her tone echoing through the stunned bistro. Harold sank back into his seat, his palm trembling as he pushed the broth away. For a moment he said nothing, his face a mask of disbelief and betrayal. Then his eyes found Jamal, who stood frozen, unsure of what to do next, but as Harold's gaze softened, a flicker of gratitude replaced the anger in his expression. Jamal hadn't just saved his life, he'd revealed a fact Harold would have never seen coming. The bistro slowly returned to a low hum of whispers and murmurs as the officers escorted Elena out. Her protests fading into the distance, guests exchanged wide-eyed glances, still reeling from what they had just witnessed. Some looked at Harold with pity, others with curiosity, but Jamal didn't move. He stood rooted to the spot, unsure if he was supposed to stay or slip away quietly. Harold turned to the lad, his face still pale, but his eyes now steady. "Jamal," he said, softly gesturing to the seat across from him. "Sit." Jamal hesitated, glancing around at the onlookers, but Harold's tone carried a burden that made him obey. Slowly, he sank into the chair, his shoulders tense. "You saved my life," Harold said, his tone low but solid. "I don't know how I can ever repay you." Jamal fidgeted, his palms gripping the edge of the table. I couldn't let it happen," he said quietly. "Couldn't just watch and say nothing." Harold nodded, his gaze distant for a moment, as if replaying the entire ordeal in his mind. "Most people would have," he said. After a pause, "they would have turned the other way, pretended they didn't see, but you didn't. That took bravery." Lad Jamal shrugged, his tone barely above a whisper. "I guess I don't like seeing people get hurt. That's all." Harold leaned back, studying the lad. For the first time, he seemed to really see him, not just as a scrappy child on the streets, but as someone with a story, a soul. "How long have you been out?" Here the question caught Jamal off guard. He looked away, his tone tinged with embarrassment. "Oh," while Harold frowned but didn't press. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black phone. "Wait here," he said, standing and stepping aside to make a call. Jamal watched him, unsure of what to do. His pulse pounded with anxiety. Was he in trouble now? Was Harold going to call someone to have him removed? But when Harold returned, his look was calm, almost kind. "Help is on the way," he said simply. "Help?" Jamal asked, his brow furrowing. Harold nodded. "I called someone. I trust they'll make sure you have a place to sleep tonight, somewhere safe, and if you'll let me, I'd like to do more than that." The lad's eyes widened. "You don't have to do that," he said quickly, his tone defensive. "I didn't do this for cash or anything." Harold smiled faintly. "I know. That's why I want to help. You did something most people wouldn't have, and trust me, Jamal, if the world had more people like you, it would be a much better place." For the first time in a long while, Jamal felt a warmth he couldn't quite describe. He looked down, unsure of what to say. The bistro guests began to disperse, but the burden of what had happened lingered in the air. Harold picked up his glass of water, taking a long sip before speaking again. "Sometimes life gives us the chance to change someone else's story," he said, his tone thoughtful. "You changed mine today, Jamal, and maybe, just maybe, I can help change yours." The lad glanced up at him, his deep eyes glistening with something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Hope. As the two sat in silence, the sun continued its arc across the sky, casting long shadows across the bistro. The lesson wasn't lost on anyone who had witnessed the event. Bravery doesn't always wear a suit, and kindness doesn't always come from the wealthy. Sometimes it's the people we overlook who have the greatest strength of all. In the end, Jamal's bravery didn't just save a life. It reminded everyone in that bistro of the power of standing up for what's right, no matter the odds. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join us for more tales of bravery, truth, and redemption. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder that even small actions can create life-changing impacts.